By early December 1941, the Second World War had already been ongoing for more than 2 years. Germany controlled much of continental Europe, while Britain remained at war against the Axis powers. The United States, although officially neutral, had become increasingly involved through economic aid, naval patrols, and industrial support for Allied nations. The situation changed rapidly following Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor on the 7th of December 1941. The United States declared war on Japan the following day. At that point, Germany was not legally at war with the United States, despite escalating tensions in the Atlantic. German U-boats had engaged in undeclared naval conflict with American vessels, and U.S. destroyers were escorting convoys carrying supplies to Britain under the Lend-Lease program. On the 11th of December 1941, Adolf Hitler addressed the German Reichstag in Berlin and formally declared war on the United States. This decision brought the European and Pacific conflicts into a single, fully global war. The declaration was not required by treaty obligations, as the Tripartite Pact obligated Germany to support Japan only if Japan were attacked, not if Japan initiated hostilities. This documentary examines 2 interconnected developments: Germany's decision to declare war on the United States and the resulting transformation of American wartime. Production between 1941 and 1945. It relies on German Reichstag transcripts, U.S. War Production Board reports, official U.S. military histories, and post-war statistical analyses. Interpretations by historians are clearly identified and separated from documented facts. The focus is on verified dates, decisions, industrial output figures, and strategic outcomes. When motivations or reactions are discussed, they are attributed to documented speeches, government records, or historical analysis rather than speculation. Before December 1941, Germany and the United States were not formally at war, but relations were increasingly hostile. U.S. government records show that President Franklin D. Roosevelt had expanded American involvement through economic and naval measures designed to support Britain. In March 1941, the U.S. Congress passed the Lend-Lease Act, allowing the transfer of military equipment to Allied nations. By mid-1941, American factories were producing aircraft vehicles and munitions specifically for British and later Soviet use. German leadership viewed these actions as indirect participation in the war. Naval encounters in the Atlantic further strained relations. U.S. Navy records document incidents involving American destroyers and German submarines, including the sinking of the USS Reuben James on the 31st of October 1941, resulting in the deaths of 115 American sailors. Although Germany did not issue a formal declaration of war at that time, German naval logs confirm increasing engagement with U.S. vessels. German intelligence assessments preserved in wartime records recognized that U.S. industrial capacity far exceeded that of any single Axis power. However, German leadership believed American public opinion would delay full military involvement in Europe. Historian interpretation. In Kershaw and other scholars argue that Adolf Hitler underestimated the speed with which the United States could mobilize for a total war. German leadership believed that even if the U.S. entered the conflict, it would take years before American military power could significantly affect the European front. At the same time, U.S. military planning documents showed that American leadership was already preparing for the possibility of a two-front war. Joint Army-Navy plans from 1941 emphasized the defeat of Germany as a strategic priority should the United States enter the war. These underlying tensions formed the context in which Germany responded to Japan's actions in the Pacific. On the 11th of December 1941, Adolf Hitler delivered a speech to the Reichstag in Berlin, announcing Germany's declaration of war on the United States. The text of the speech is preserved in German government records and wartime transcripts. In the speech, Hitler accused the United States of provoking conflict through economic sanctions, convoy escorts, and naval actions in the Atlantic. He cited American support for Britain and alleged violations of neutrality as justification for the declaration. The speech framed the decision as a defensive response rather than an aggressive expansion of the war. Documented fact: Germany formally declared war on the United States on the 11th of December, 1941. Italy followed with its own declaration shortly thereafter. No German military emergency forced the decision. German forces were already engaged on the Eastern Front against the Soviet Union, where Operation Barbarossa had stalled before Moscow. The declaration therefore expanded Germany's list of enemies at a time when military resources were already stretched. Historian interpretation. Many historians argue that Hitler's decision was driven by ideological hostility toward the United States in the belief that war was inevitable. Others emphasize strategic miscalculation, noting that Germany gained no immediate military advantage from declaring war. German Naval Command records indicate that U-boat operations against American shipping intensified immediately after the declaration. Operation Paukenschlag, launched in early 1942, targeted poorly defended shipping along the U.S. East Coast. The declaration had immediate diplomatic consequences. It unified Allied strategy and removed any remaining legal barriers to full American engagement in the European war. Following Germany's declaration of war, the United States formally entered the European conflict. Congressional records show that the declaration of war against Germany passed with near unanimity. Thus, strategic planning shifted rapidly. Official military histories document that the United States adopted a Germany-first strategy, prioritizing the defeat of Germany while maintaining defensive operations in the Pacific. Coordination with Britain intensified. Joint Chiefs of Staff meetings and combined planning conferences formalized Allied command structures. American troops began arriving in Britain in early 1942 as part of Operation Bolero. Documented fact: the declaration enabled the full application of American industrial, financial, and military resources to the European war without political or legal restriction. Public reaction is documented in contemporary newspapers, government surveys, and letters preserved in archives. These sources indicate widespread acceptance of the war decision, though individual attitudes varied. Historian interpretation. Scholars emphasize that Germany's declaration simplified American war planning by removing uncertainty about Europe. Rather than debating intervention, U.S. leadership could focus entirely on mobilization and coordination. This strategic clarity directly influenced American industrial policy, as production priorities could now be set for a prolonged global war. American industrial mobilization accelerated rapidly after December 1941. The War Production Board, WPBS, established in January 1942, coordinated the conversion of civilian industry to military output. Documented facts from WPB reports show that between 1941 and 1945, the United States produced approximately 297,000 to 300,000 military aircraft, 86,000 to 100,000 tanks and self-propelled guns. Approximately 193,000 artillery pieces production took place across thousands of factories nationwide, including automobile plants converted to tank and aircraft production. Aircraft production increased from fewer than 3,000 units annually in 1939 to over 96,000 in 1944 alone. Tank production expanded similarly, with peak output occurring in 1943 and 1944. Labor force participation expanded significantly. Government records document the entry of millions of workers into industrial employment, including women and previously underrepresented groups. Historian interpretation. Economic historians emphasize that American mass production techniques, standardized designs, and access to raw materials allowed output levels unmatched by any other combatant. Unlike Germany, which faced increasing shortages due to bombing and resource constraints, the United States experienced no direct industrial disruption from enemy attack. German wartime production figures compiled from post-war statistical surveys indicate significantly lower output levels than those of the United States. Documented estimates show that Germany produced approximately 119,000 military aircraft, around 49,000 tanks, and self-propelled guns. While German production increased under Albert Speer after 1942, it never matched American output. German industry faced chronic shortages of fuel, labor, and raw materials. Allied bombing campaigns further disrupted production. Official German reports document damage to transportation networks, fuel refineries, and manufacturing centers. Historian interpretation. Scholars argue that Germany's late and incomplete mobilization, combined with strategic bombing, prevented sustained parity with Allied production. The imbalance meant that by 1943, Allied forces could replace losses more rapidly than German forces, affecting operational outcomes on all fronts. American industrial output directly supported Allied military operations. Lend-Lease shipments supplied Britain, the Soviet Union, and other allies with vehicles, aircraft, food, and raw materials. Documented records show that thousands of aircraft, tanks, and trucks were delivered to the Soviet Union. Supporting operations on the Eastern Front, American production enabled sustained campaigns in North Africa, Italy, and Western Europe. Equipment losses could be replaced at a pace unmatched by Axis powers, U.S. Navy and Army Air Forces. Records show that expanding aircraft availability allowed continuous strategic bombing operations against Germany from 1942 onward. Historian interpretation. Analysts emphasize that industrial capacity, rather than battlefield tactics alone, determined the long-term outcome of the war in Europe. Germany's declaration of war on the United States unified Allied efforts across theaters. Planning for operations such as the Normandy invasion relied heavily on American production capacity. By 1944, Allied forces enjoyed overwhelming material superiority. German military records from late 1944 document critical shortages of fuel, aircraft, and trained personnel. Documented fact. American production supported sustained offensives until Germany's surrender in May 1945. Historian interpretation. The decision to declare war on the United States is widely regarded as a strategic error that accelerated Germany's defeat by bringing the world's largest industrial economy fully into the conflict. The German declaration of war on the United States on the 11th of December, 1941, marked a decisive turning point in the Second World War. The decision, documented in Reichstag records, expanded the conflict into a fully global war. the United States responded with rapid political unity and industrial mobilization. War Production Board records demonstrate production levels that exceeded those of all Axis powers combined. Documented output figures show that American factories produced hundreds of thousands of aircraft, tens of thousands of tanks, and vast quantities of artillery and supplies. These resources sustained Allied operations across multiple theaters. Historian interpretation. Scholars consistently conclude that Germany's declaration removed any remaining constraints on American involvement and ensured that the Axis powers would face overwhelming material opposition. This documentary has examined documented decisions, production data, and strategic outcomes without dramatization or speculation. The historical record demonstrates that industrial capacity, once fully mobilized, played a central role in determining the war's outcome. The transformation of the United States from a neutral power to the principal industrial force of the Allied war effort remains one of the defining developments of the Second World War.